very, very long. There's a purpose for it. It was part of baptismal catechesis in the ancient church, the 8 cycle, the Matthew cycle readings. I'm going to start off by asking you to step out of your 21st century mind and your culture, and I want you to start entering into the culture in which the events we just read about took place. And that's the only way to see. How many of you, one of my favorite movies of all time, Lawrence of Arabia? Okay, how many of you are familiar with someone? Remember the scene at the well? All right, that's where Omar Sharif is seen at the distance coming, and Lawrence and his guide are sitting there, and the Omar Sharif character shoots the guide. All right? In Middle Eastern culture, especially in the ancient world, to offer someone a drink of water is to offer friendship. It is equivalent for a desert nomadic people. You offer them water, you are offering your friendship. And in that scene, that makes sense now. The Omar Sharif character, Peter O'Toole, would give him friendship, but not the person from the tribe he hated. So now you'll never see that movie again without it making sense. This is part of biblical literacy. This is why what I do on Tuesday with Bible study is really important, to make it make sense. So, in case you didn't get it from all of the readings, this is about water. And this is about more than water, it's about thirsting. Thirsting for God. Reading is very beautifully read. We're told, that a very imperfect people are wandering through the desert now that they've won their freedom. And they're begging of their liberator, Moses. They said, look, we're out here in the desert, just in case you haven't noticed, there's no water here. So you better find us something, or we're all going to die. And their prayer to God goes something like this. God, you need to quench our thirst, and you need to do it now. Because if we all die in the desert, then you never really rescued us from slavery, did you? So their prayer really does make sense. Many centuries later, a warrior king, who happened to also be a songwriter and a poet, writes about that incident. And his song doesn't have a name, it has a number. We call it Psalm 95. And that's the psalm we all prayed after that first reading. This very imperfect king, whose name was David, who writes a song that says, we can't be like our ancestors, who all they did was to do wrong and complain and whine. You can't harden your hearts. You can't threaten God just because you don't get your own way, which I think is very ironic and humorous, considering the fact it's David who's writing this. You know, the proverbial person in the glass house that shouldn't have been throwing the stone. And then finally, one of the most fascinating and most wonderful characters in all of Scripture, and we don't even know her name. Jesus meets this nameless woman. She is a Samaritan. She is a half-breed, as we'd say in politically incorrect English. To go from Galilee in the north to Judea in the south, everyone who had half a brain never went straight north to south. You didn't do that. Because the middle section was this land called Samaria. It still is. Okay? There are still some people who ethnically consider themselves Samaritans. They are the descendants of peoples whom the Assyrians conquered in 721 BC, transported most of those peoples out, kept the poor and the useless still living in the land, migrated other captive peoples into that area. They intermarried so that they're not purely Jewish, they're not purely anything. And the Jewish people have hated them for almost 3,000 years. And the feelings were quite mutual. All right? When you traveled from Galilee to Judea, what you did is you drove the way I used to drive when I first got up here. You would start, you'd hang a right, stick to the road you know, because if you find a side road, you're doomed. All right? Cross the Transjordan, come down all the way to the other side, then cross the Jordan back at Bethany, and then go to Jerusalem. You would never go straight north-south, because you have to go through that area where people do not like you, and vice versa. So Jesus has an encounter with this woman. He's sitting by the well. Those who are closest to him have gone to get some food. From this point on, the way John portrays this, as I had a spiritual director once say to me, if you want to pronounce them properly by title, given the fact they never get it, you will now refer to them as the disciples. Because they just will not get it from this point on. So just kind of keep that in mind. So what do we know about her? She's hot and she's tired and her life has been down the toilet. Now, you're going to assume, like you've heard so many sermons, that this is about this particular Hollywood-type slut who's been married 5 times. Step out of your culture. Women in the first century had no right to marry whom they chose. They were property. If she was married 5 times, it's either because she was widowed or she was cast aside by her husband, and because she had no rights, which means she could not control property unless she was money, she either had to be sent back to her father or she had to be married off to somebody else if her father didn't want her. She had been rejected 5 times. Maybe she was widowed. Maybe she was a victim of what was called levirate marriage, where, you know, in the Old Testament, reference is made to this. If you died leaving your wife without a child, then your brother had the obligation, moral obligation, to marry her and produce a child in your name through her. Maybe that's what was going on. Bottom line is, we don't know what was going on. But we've made the assumptions, haven't we, about her. So clean up your dirty little mind. It has nothing to do with that. All right? She is hot and tired and not to be messed with. And while she is thirsty for water, she's thirsting for something else. She wants meaning in her life. And Jesus is going to quench your thirst for both God and meaning. Now, anytime the early Christians ever told a story about her, it was always in the context of the meaning of Christian baptism, the pouring of water that makes us part of the family of God, that brings us together. This is about baptism. This is why it's in the A cycle of readings. This is why in the olden days, people preparing for baptism would always be readings like this, as you'll see in the future. There are obvious allusions to water. There's not so obvious allusions to this is a journey that she's taking. It's a journey growing in faith. Because believe it or not, and like it or not, she is not so different from us. She bears the sweat and the smell of life with all of its ups and downs. She has known love, she has known rejection, she knows work, she knows pain, but she doesn't know God. And Jesus is going to take the time to go to her and teach her something. Those of you who were here last week, you heard, again, very powerful scripture story of Nicodemus, the scholar, the male, the person who's part of the religious establishment, who comes to Jesus at night to learn something about him. John plays this guy off against this nameless woman who has no power, no control over her own life, who comes and Jesus seeks her out in the daytime. It's noon. It's the time when there's no shadow, by the way. Something poetic that should be lost on us. And he takes her from a journey from starting out with hostility, when he asks her for a drink of water, which he's asking her for friendship in that culture, as well as water. And what does she do? How does she react to him? Well, for those of you who may have gotten up early this morning, one of the great movies of all time was on one of those movie channels, Taxi Driver. And she responds to Jesus the way Robert De Niro does. You talking to me? That's exactly what she does. And then her curiosity is piqued, her skepticism, because she's tough. And he talks about living water gushing up, and she says to him, stupid, you don't even have a bucket. How are you going to give me water? She's on a different level. And if you can give me your special water, good. I don't have to come here. I don't see you with a bucket. I don't see you moving. So then they have their little encounter where Jesus makes it very clear, hey, there's something important about you. I want to reach out to you. And what she does is what so many people do. Rather than take the step for a relationship with God, she becomes a theologian, so she starts talking about God rather than talking to. So she gets into these theological nonsense. Well, you know, you people worship on Mount Zion, and we worship here. Which is the right way? Jesus is stupid. No, that's not what this is about. This is about you. This is about your journey. This is about giving meaning to your life. He is calling her to something much greater, to faith, to commitment. He's calling her because he's going to allow her to spread his word. Now think about what you also heard. So much is going on. When the disciples get back, they bring back food. They've gone into a village. They haven't said a word about where they've come from. They haven't said a word about who Jesus is. They just get the food, they come back. She, after this encounter, realizing she's dealing with someone special, what does she do? She runs back into town, and using herself sort of as the focal point, she says, look, I have found a holy man, or maybe something even more, he knows more about me than you people do. And she brings people back by any definition of the word apostle, to be sent. This nameless woman, whom we will never know who she is and never see again, is the first apostle. Who brings the message of Jesus to someone and brings people back to him. Coming to Jesus is a journey. And maybe that journey is made when you physically travel in pilgrimage, or maybe it's made in the course of time from where you were when you were 14 as opposed to where you are as an adult, or where you are as you get older. But no matter where you have been or who you are, if your heart is open, Jesus can make us right with the Father. That's the definition of righteousness. And the moment you were baptized, the moment you were washed in the waters of baptism, that was the moment Christ claimed you forever. We're going to be happy in about 6 weeks or so. You know the Shu family has been with us for these many months, and very joyfully, their little boy, Carl, is going to be baptized. So we're going to have someone to focus on in terms of this wonderful moment. But remember, a baptism of one person is a reminder to the rest of us of renewing who we are. We have 4 people being confirmed at the great vigil of Easter. And if they've heard me once, they've heard me say this 6 zillion times. To be confirmed is to take ownership of your baptismal vows for the first time in your life. To realize you have been claimed by Christ forever. And that baptism is the moment when we renounce the evil one and the corrupting forces of evil, where we really turn to Jesus and say, you are the Lord, you are the priority of my life. So this is about Christ reaching out for us. It's about water being more than water. It's about a journey being intensely more than a journey. It's about doing the will of the Father just as Jesus did and acknowledging him as Lord. It is about true spiritual change, and it's about a promise. The journey may be difficult, the journey often is, but he walks with us, he accompanies us. He doesn't only just call us to be renewed, he empowers us to be renewed. And he will never walk away. God has done everything. We need only be willing to listen and walk with him. So if I may butcher the movie